It was really important for me when, in the beginning stages of this show, really listening to Anne's vision about what she wanted the show to be about. And I wanted to make some work that reacted to or paralleled her objective. The Public Enemy piece that I'm referencing in the I'm Not Your Moving Target comes from me thinking about how did I receive information, who was responsible, and it was an artist, activists that were responsible for communicating what was important. What Public Enemy did was basically shooting like a missile in the air to bring attention to what was happening to Black men. I wanted to reference that, except put the focus on women.
Even as we were approaching the show, even as the show opened, we were still losing these Black women that were seemingly anonymous and not as important as some of the Black men that had been murdered by the hands of police throughout the country. Because I was overwhelmed, and there's so many, from transgender women to queer women to Black women, like all across the board, and I happen to fit in many of those identities. So I was like, this is too much. There's too many perspectives to approach from, so I chose to be super anonymous so that whoever viewed this work or whoever got a chance to talk about this work, whether it be now or in the future, that it would have this variety of dialogues to be made, and it wasn't one specific murder or one specific death that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the entire group of people.
I'm interested in folds and textures and the stories that these things tell, utilitarian practices, the fact that these are handmade, albeit kitschy. There was something endearing about the idea they were mementos made for a woman, made for a girl. Whether or not it's about a woman of color, it's a woman's identity. And in this case, it's been obscured, it's been lost. It is the shell of its former self in metal. I invite people to sort of witness how in very conceptual ways and different ways the collectives come together to create individual works that are our own expressions of how we're responding to this movement, of how we're responding to the injustices that are happening to women of color around the world, and how it's current and needs to continue to be current in the dialogue and the conversation, in what's being created visually and what's being done in performance and film and other media. And I'm very honored to have been a part of this show in relationship to the movement and to Anne's concept of how do I say her name, because there are a multitude of ways that you can say her name, but saying her name is that we're all collectively saying her name because we're all connected to this.
My piece is referencing a work, a choreo poem and play by Ntozake Shange named For Color Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. There was a particular moment at the very end of the play. One of the women characters closes by saying, I found God in myself and I loved her fiercely. It's the conclusion where the women begin to repeat and they gather together, and it soon becomes a song of joy as part of that choreography. So thinking about the repetition of the characters in the play, the way that Black women in my daily life were organizing and healing each other, and wanting to pick out a moment of kind of power and uplift in response to trauma.
I really felt a need to bring about stories that affect people with my background, being first-generation Mexican-American, or having parents who are migrant workers, or having indigenous roots. I really wanted to create something that symbolizes that. And I really like working with fonts. So I created a font that kind of symbolized indigenous influence. And I also created a silhouette of Sandra Bland to create like a sort of a focal point on her. And I also wanted it to be interactive, so I allowed the viewer to make comments and either write names of people they felt had experienced an injustice, like women of color in particular, and or stories or just information about women who do not get enough media.
I just can't explain to you in words what it's like to drive the same route that she drove and to be nervous to drive to work those first couple of weeks, just realizing, wow, she was pulled over, you know, for a blinker, and 3 days later, she's gone. I wondered if other artists were struggling with how to deal with emotionally the Say Her Name movement, particularly violence against women of color. Not all the issues evolve around the police. There's other issues. I didn't want it to be a hate the police type of event, but certainly we all connected with Sandra Bland because that's our neighborhood. You know, we have a certain fear as women of color that based on someone's opinion of what they think we are, we could just end up in a deadly situation. And so I think at the core, it really focuses on each of our emotions and how we internally deal with what's going on around us. We might not be on all the front lines and protesting and marching and making videos, but we can release ourselves through this artwork and hopefully open a door so that people can see how we're feeling internally instead of just making a judgment from the outside.